you very much. I'm really honored and I really appreciate the invitation. I wish I could be there in person as was originally planned. Unfortunately, things happen, but I'm really happy to join you via Zoom. And I really, again, want to thank the organizers, Victoria and Professor Kylie Messer-Jones for the invitation. And I hope that we're able to travel to Australia in the spring. Hopefully, that'll be a couple of times in the past, I've been invited, but for one reason or another, I haven't been able to make it, but I will in the future. So thank you so much for inviting me. I also want to thank the members of my team who are here, Yadira Caballero, who's the program manager, and Alexandra Mora Medina, who's the communications coordinator for our center, for helping me today, and also for all the work they do on behalf of the center. Without their work, there is no way that we can be accomplishing some of the many things I want to share with you today. And I also want to acknowledge that we reside here in the traditional homelands of the Tohono O'odham and the Pasquayaqui peoples. They are the ones whose care makes sure these lands will continue to be preserved for future generations to come. Um, Today, if I can go to slide number 2, uh, that's the agenda. You can probably see that. And I have about probably 30, 35 minutes of comments, and I want to sort of balance or align with the intent of the symposium and share with you some of the programming we've been doing, some of the challenges that we had, and at the end, some of the lessons learned through this journey through our center, especially in the work we do with communities on both sides of the border. Briefly about the University of Arizona, we're a land-grant university, research intensive, located in Tucson, Arizona. We're part of three major university systems in the state. We are Hispanic serving as a federal designation, and Native American and American Indian serving, although our enrollments are yet to reach a better number for that. And we also have a strong component of service and the community. And so that's for in terms of where we are here in Tucson. In terms of this Confluencenter for Creative Inquiry, if we can go to slide number 3, we are what you would call a humanities institute, but not quite. And this is what we've been using the term creative inquiry as a sort of a third space in order not only to be more inclusive in terms of interdisciplinarity, but also to make sure that the arts have a firm place in these conversations of research. So when the center was founded back in 2010 it was a grassroots effort by a number of faculty members along with the administration. It was very important that the arts had the right place, and creative inquiry became that sort of inclusive space that would allow people doing non-traditional research, creative efforts, art to be part of the center. So I'm trying to kind of also locate how the center it goes beyond the traditional humanities. Quickly, also, it's important to mention that at the University of Arizona, we have a really funky constellation in the humanities. Half of the humanities reside in the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences, and the other half reside in the College of Humanities. So, and I'm not going to go into that. It's a long historical, institutional things that happen, but that's why our center became a suitable space for some of those folks across colleges as well. Normally, you find humanities institutes and humanities colleges and so forth. And so we strive to provide a physical intellectual home for interdisciplinary inquiry. And also, we've been lucky and fortunate to work with a number of international projects in the course of our existence as a center. I think the other thing would be important here to locate where we are. In the next slide, it gives you a pretty good idea. in relation to where you are. That's slide number 4. And that would have been my journey to visit with you, but it didn't happen. So at some point, I will. In the meantime, I've been checking popular culture products and media products filmed in your region. So I'm a big fan, by the way, of especially detective stuff happening there and series. And then the next slide would allow me to talk a little bit about some of the context that we have here in the last, I would say, 15 years. And in a way, some of these this political impact has been the driver or some of the actions and responses that we have here. If we think about the work of the Canadian activist and intellectual Harsha Walia and her book Border and Rule, how she talks about how borders function through exclusion, territorial diffusion, commodified inclusion, and discursive control, then we can conclude the borders are not static, but productive regimes generating relations of dominance. And so in this case, migration as a phenomenon closely attached to border is influenced not only by capitalism, but also by oppressive hierarchies and climate catastrophes. And it has become a mode of global governance, as you probably know where you are. And so in response to some of these challenges instituted by this regime described by Walia, local border narratives are also often distorted by political and economical interests, portraying the regions in a state of chaos and crisis, something that exacerbates racism and xenophobia. In the particular case of the U.S. Mexico region, and you can see here three bullets, in 2010, the state of Arizona implemented what it was called Show Me Your Papers law, Arizona SB 1070, and HB 2281. And these laws targeted Latino populations in the region, leading to the deportability norms and attacking critical education programs such as Mexican-American studies. And interestingly enough, this year, the state legislature has brought another law that is going to try to do a similar effect. So that has not really gone away. The second element here is the pandemic and its impact. We were disproportionately affected in border communities, and this exacerbated existing inequalities and disrupted cross-border activities and cultural exchanges. And in fact, the US government effectively closed the border by prohibiting Mexican citizens to cross for 19 months during the year 2020 and 2021. And then the third component is the political rhetoric that continues to dehumanize the inhabitants of the region. And it has become a political discourse of mainstream politics in the US and all over the world. So at this point, we've seen some effects. There was hope that with the Biden administration, there was going to be some changes in terms of opportunities for an easier flow of people, but that hasn't really been the change either. And so within that context, we working with people here on campus, we created a series of programs that got the attention of the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. And this is what the Fronteridades program came about. And if I can go to the next slide, probably the next one to the number 7. Yeah. And so what we did with Fronteridades was to create an alternative space in which frontera, border, and humanities would come together as a sort of a site of operation, if you will, in which it was not about migration, but it was about the local conditions of the communities along the border region that were pretty much obliterated by the discourse, but also by the political reactions, and by also the effects of a full extra militarization of those regions, right? And so what we were trying to do is to create a discourse for coexistence in which the communities and their narratives would be at the forefront of the projects. And that's something that is being studied by a number of people. Some people talk about the hijacking of the border as a narrative. And so this project was trying to create precisely a response to those conditions, and also to fulfill a need, right? Because border communities face significant challenges besides the COVID situation, but also we have high levels of socioeconomic inequality, health disparities, and also a sense of, as I mentioned before, a sense of chaos and instability that sometimes is completely fabricated by mainstream media outlets from many different places that come to the border to get a story and to take a look at migration or migrants, but at the same time not really paying attention to what's happening locally, right? So some of the goals of this project were, one, to narrate the border, to expand border learning, that is, create experiential learning opportunities for scholars and students across disciplines, and also cultivate what we call the fronteridades community, that is, create long-lasting relationships among not only the fronteridades partners, but also better relations and opportunities for scholars, artists, human rights advocates, and community leaders. And this is one of the things that our center has. Our center has a very strong component of community engagement since its inception, and that's been by design. And it's a response also we are in a very heavy STEM university. And one of the complaints we hear in the community all the time is that we are extremely extractive as an institution. So we are intentionally responding to those claims by the community, trying to prove them wrong, and also trying to create those spaces in which hopefully there will be more equity in terms of these relationships and what we do with them. The program of Fronteridades also included, we have 4 programs: Border Scholars, Border Arts Collective, Migrant and Asylum Seeker Stories Program, and what we call Injustice on the Border Institute, which will be the culmination of these efforts. The program ends next year. It's been running since 2019, and part of the intention here was also to capitalize on those historical relationships that exist between Sonora and the Arizona region. I mean, I can go on and on about some historical components. This region was the last space that Mexico ceded to the United States in 1954 through the Treaty of the so-called Gadsden Purchase. So historically, there is a very strong connection, and there is a corridor of people, ideas, goods, and other things that flows north-south, south-north. In fact, we have one of the few rivers, the Santa Cruz River, that flows north, which is rare in the Northern Hemisphere. And that's a reflection of this historical strong connection that we have across the Sonora-Arizona region. So part of the project, part of the intention of the project was to capitalize in those relationships and also create an arts collective, a corridor that will stretch from Tucson, Arizona to Hermosillo, Sonora, Mexico, and with a strong presence in the cities of Nogales. There's a Nogales, Arizona, and a Nogales, Sonora, right? So those are so-called twin cities or sister cities, border cities. And that's another of the spaces that is of interest for us due to its diversity and the talent of its inhabitants, right? There is also the economic development and the trade and commerce arguments that are part of this. But again, we always are superseded by those arguments, and we forget to talk about communities, right? Other 2 components that we thought were important in terms of fronteridades. Can we go to the next slide? Where to include also a project that was carried out in the Tohono-O'odham Nation by one of our colleagues who is a poet of the Tohono-O'odham language. And the Tohono-O'odham Nation is interesting because it's a binational nation, indigenous nation. It has a large territory in the state of Sonora in Mexico, but also in the state of Arizona. And it creates a very unique space in terms of challenges and opportunities. So we wanted to make sure that the indigenous component was also incorporated in the vision of the border. Sometimes this gets overlooked. And the other component of the project was co-amplifying Blackness in the borderlands. And this project really wanted to also highlight the rich tradition and, again, overlooked history of African American presence in the region. And interestingly enough, at some point, through another group of people in the community, they created an African American Museum of South Arizona, and now these two projects are joined together. So that's another thing we want to be more inclusive, more reflective of our historical and current realities in the region. And we also dedicated a number of space for migrant and asylum seeker stories through plays, theatrical performances, murals, and other things, working with a couple of nonprofits here. One is called Coalición de Derechos Humanos, the Coalition of Human Rights. And the slide shows you one of the events that we have in which we had some of our colleagues, both scholars and also activists. And Isabel Garcia, who is featured in the picture, is one of the founders of this organization that has been serving South Arizona for many years on behalf, advocating on behalf of migrants. So Salvavision, which is the other organization that you can see in the photo, Dora Rodriguez is another community activist that has been working on behalf of Central American migrants for the most part. So those are some of the things that we wanted to include in the project, and also thinking about the sustainability component. I mean, it's nice to have foundation funds, but they will go away at some point, right? So that's one of the challenges that we have right now, and the opportunities in terms of trying to ensure that we work closely with partners and other agencies, not only in the U.S. federal government, but also in an inter-American context too. We are hoping that we'll be able to reach out to international agencies and also partners in Mexico that are interested in these issues. If we can go to the next slide. So these are some of the examples. We created a program with scholars, and in this case, we have three colleagues who are wonderful. Dr. Robin Renike, she's been working on a forensic citizenship in the Borderlands project. And again, this is in response to the high number of deaths and missing migrants in the region. And Robin was the founder of an organization called the Colibri Center for Human Rights, which main purpose was to collect DNA from the remains of migrants in the desert and work with the Tucson office of the coroner's office in order to create a program to identify remains of people, but also to connect the families of those searching for the missing migrants to some office that could give them information. So Robin's work has been wonderful. She's also working with Madres Buscadoras, which is a group in Mexico of the mothers searching for their missing children. And that's another of the components that we've been able to bring into Fronteridades. My colleague Sama Al-Shaivich is a Palestinian scholar that resides in Tucson, and she's been doing a lot of work looking at different representations, especially of women across the global South, and also thinking about how these borders and migrations end up in artistic metaphors that represent different states in different gender issues. And Marco Serafin is a Brazilian scholar residing here in Tucson who's been working on an arts project related to HIV, the HIV/AIDS crisis in the U.S. Mexico border, especially among migrants and people that are coming from other places. So in the next slide, I can also comment about our wonderful grad students that are really have come and done excellent work in their projects. Linda Choi has been working on a auto-ethnobiography of Asian American immigrants here in the Nogales region. And Claudia Maria Mariel Miranda has been working with youth in the Tijuana region in order to create arts programs that can better help some of these young people in Tijuana to pretty much stay away from some of the dangers that some of these communities experience, especially the migrant populations. Dugan Mayer is also doing a very interesting project visualizing surveillance through arts installation, working with photographers and other artists in the region. And I think these are just examples of the variety and diversity that of partnerships that we've been able to do with Fronteridades. There are a slide. It's can move to that. This is about the amplifying Blackness in the borderlands that I mentioned, working with the Southern African American Museum of Southern Arizona. And then the next slide, talks about this collective that happened, that was created in Nogales, Sonora, Mexico, in a moment in which people could not cross. Mexican citizens were prohibited from crossing. So these community promoters, promotoras transfronterizas, created, it could be defined as a well-being group of migrant women who really needed attention in a moment of crisis. And it became not only a support group, but also a project that was able to help them financially, for instance. We did programming related to internet access during the pandemic, which in Mexico sometimes is problematic and expensive. So part of the group was also working with elderly women, the mothers of the migrants that were also very isolated. So it became a very interesting way to look at how some of the gender issues and some of the isolation related to the pandemic was being in some ways fought, but at some time in other ways kind of integrated into better integrated and better dealt with by some of these groups. The next slide. This is what we have here is a very short video of the first iteration of Fronteridades, and we can play that like a minute or a couple of minutes of this. Will give you an idea, a visual idea what we're talking about in a moment in which, again, people could not cross from Mexico to the U.S.
Can I just let you know, Javier, you have 15 minutes left of this session just to help you make decisions about slides going forward. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No sound.
No sound. No sound. And you need to enable sound from here?
Okay.
Oh, they need to, and you need to enable sound from your end when you share slides.
We're still gonna put those in the chat anyway, so
Okay, thank you.
they can view later, but this gives you an idea. Okay, let me see. So another thing that we did in terms of work with the cities of Nogales, and especially with the city of Nogales, Sonora in Mexico, was to create an arts project that would support emerging artists in the community. And it says here the last 2 years, but now we have the third cohort. So we have supported almost 30 artists. And in many ways, they are really changing the face of public art in Nogales, from murals to installations to mosaics to a number of things that are publicly visible. These young people have really not only been able to finish their project, but also created their own collectives and their own conversations. Now, and some of them are also working transnationally across Nogales, Arizona as well. So this is an interesting example of community collaboration, but also of collaboration with a city government in Mexico in a moment in which institutional challenges related to funding, for instance, were really hard to overcome. But we work close with the university administration in order to be able to pay it and make sure these funds reach out to the artists on the other side of the border. To that end, we found a nonprofit, a fiduciary nonprofit that operated on both sides. So we were able to lower the cost of the transactions and more money will go to the artists. So that's another of the things that we've been learning. We spent about 4 months talking to our administrators in the university to convince them this was viable. So I'm just mentioning that in the context of the conversation that you're going to have in the next couple of days, as how we need to be creative in terms of not only art, but also administratively creative, right? In the next slide. So this is another interesting project because we are in a moment in which we are going to take a play that was written and also inspired by asylum seeker stories. It was done in Tucson, and now we're gonna take it to Nogales, Sonora. It was done in English here in Tucson. It's gonna be done in Spanish in Nogales, Sonora. And this Coalición de Derechos Humanos has an interesting side, which is it's called Teatro Dignidad, Dignity Theater, which is kind of the cultural side of the organization. And they've been extremely active in terms of bringing those stories to be represented in theaters and also in public venues. So we have not only the traditional theater, but also street theater as it relates to sharing these experiences with communities. We go to the next one. And this is another project that we have here in terms of opportunities. After some of the success that the Fronteridades projects achieved, the Ford Foundation reached out to us, asking us to become the archival partner of a project they already funded the year before. And so they provided funds for about 48 grantees. 1/3 of those grantees were artists, 1/3 were journalists, and also many of them were community activists or nonprofit organizations advocated on behalf of migrants, asylum seekers, and other underrepresented people. And so we made an alliance with our University of Arizona library system, especially the special collections, to become the archival partners. And I became co-PI of the project with my colleague, librarian and curator, Veronica Reyes. And so one of the things that we did with this project was to begin thinking or rethinking the notion of archive. And rather than having something that is monolithic and enclosed in a particular space, we were thinking of the archive as a dynamic generative space for dialogues, intersections, creativity, and not only connected to research or academia, but also to the communities themselves. And so the contents of the grantees funded by the Ford Foundation became really that the materials for the archive. One of the things that we needed to overcome here was the lack of trust in institutional, in the institution taking care of the materials and making sure that the materials were accessible. And that was a long conversation we had to have with all of them, especially because we needed to also change some of the processes and rules that the libraries from copyright to access to who owns what. And that was also an interesting process and learning experience, especially for those of us who are not part of the librarian or museum or curated communities. And so part of the objectives here were also the same, trying to reclaim those border narratives and bring the cultural power of migrant justice organizations to the forefront. One of the interesting concepts that emerged here, it's inspired by one of the participants, Gabriel Solis, and he talks about archives of survival. And this concept views archives as more than collections. They are more sites of memory, culture, and history for marginalized communities. And these archives of survival aim to interrupt cycles of violence and trauma, fostering community resilience and empowerment through relationships built on collective care, inquiry, collaboration, resistance, and resilience. And he also emphasizes that these archives of survival focus on building what he calls a moral architecture. And this moral architecture is centered on community and care to elevate regional stories and highlight issues of racial justice and gender equality. So that's been one of the drivers for this project. If we can go to the next slide, you can probably see a little description, slide 17. And then slide 18 shows what we call frontier forums. And these frontier forums were basically online opportunities to network among the grantees, but also to showcase some of the projects and basically to socialize the idea of an archive and try to make sure that the grantees were receptive and receive a better understanding how we were thinking about archives in a non-traditional sense. So their works could be also shared with the institution. And so we did a number of these, and they were really, really successful in terms of creating community beyond the local space. In the next slide can tell you a little bit part of the process that we use, the three components of this archiving process. And the majority of the participants were from the US, but we really have a wide range all the way from San Diego to Brownsville, and also in places in Chihuahua and Sonora and other places in Mexico. And I think the next slide. Yeah, 50 plus Mexico borderlands. And we ended up in slide 21 with a symposium that brought together over 200 people that participated in the process. Now, what was the key and the secret for this success? The funding from the Ford Foundation. The Ford Foundation put extra funding to be able to bring these people to Tucson in March and be here for 3 days, interacting and creating community and learning more. And so that's one of the things. Funding has to be part of the conversation that we have. There is no other way to do it. And luckily, we were able to do that. The next project is the last project I'm going to share with you. Is called Pandemidiarios. And this was a direct response to the slide 23, please. To the pandemic. At first, the first cohort was done. We gave $500 mini grants to members of the community. About 18 applied. I think everybody got $500. And we called them shelter in place at the time. But then that evolved as the pandemic was moving, right? So Pandemidiarios merges the Spanish pandemic, La Pandemia, with diaries, and represents personal reflections and stories of these folks. We were not really aiming to privilege any population, so it was an open call. And we wanted to really create opportunities for these people to share some of the stories, right? The next slide. So the third cohort was especially geared to Native and underrepresented communities in the region. And that was really, really rewarding in terms of the results. In Arizona, we have 22 federally recognized indigenous tribes. With Tucson, I mentioned the Tono, O'odham Nation, the Pasco Yaqui tribe in Tucson, but we have 20 others in Arizona. And the theme was stories of resilience from individuals from these communities. One example, and you can see in the slide, is this bracelet created by Alexander Peshley. He's an elder enrolled citizen of the Navajo Nation, and he created a silver cup bracelet to tell the story of the Navajo people who traveled through emergence and went through different stages to encounter different events. And this is called monsters, liars in the Navajo tradition. So Alexander basically rewrote this mythical history, and COVID became the monster slayer that was going to be represented in the bracelet. So that's just one example of the numerous projects that we're working with, and in fact, and this is going to be part of an archive. Again, the special collection has a community archive called Family Community Archive, and we're going to make sure that this digital museum is preserved. And so, and you can see in the map the location of some of the recipients. They are from all over the state and from different Native nations here. I think I'm gonna move to closing here, and in the next slide, I just want to mention some of the things we learned in terms of this process. I think trust and equity can be the overarching themes of this process. Establishing interconnectedness and building positive relations with communities. We need to acknowledge and recognize where these people are when we're working with them, and also be mindful of the space that you gather on. That's one of the things that it's a constant, and sometimes we forget about this. I mentioned the banning extractivist practices, and also monitoring institutional behaviors for those practices is very important, because sometimes, for instance, our center is the only organization dealing with a particular community, and then you might have people from other areas and disciplines coming to do different things, mining, science, who knows what, and there is no acknowledgement of what they are. They just go to their project, trying to do their experiments, take away stuff, and somebody needs to pay attention to that. So we've been playing that role in some ways, and also creating equity spaces for community partners, and also understand that you're gonna be exposed to a lot of storytelling. It's not gonna be, the 5-minute, 10-minute, 15-minute report. Is going to be people telling you in their way what the issues are. Also, in this case, I think we developed an ear, so to speak, to talk to and listen to the community, and also to think about what are their needs and where the investment needs to go. Sometimes we come to a project, oh, we gotta get materials for murals and painting. They don't need that. What they need is staff. What they need is a coordinator. What they need is some interns, people that can labor. That's something that sometimes gets overlooked, and we've been very mindful to pay attention to those needs from the different organizations, and also be an advocate in terms of those communities. And one of the things we did, and I mentioned it, is to be able to find ways to pay and make sure that the funds will go to the artists in the Mexican side, some of these projects, because the university would not allow us to do that, right? So we needed to find those spaces of intentionally rewarding the work. And with that, I think I want to thank you and take any questions.
Thank you so very much, Javier. That is absolutely exemplary work that you've been doing at your center. I'm so impressed, and I'm sure this is the beginning of a long relationship we're going to develop between our emerging center here and yours. You've got so much to teach us. I'm a border kid myself, but the other border. The closest petrol station for me was in the United States. So I'm very aware of what you're saying here, and in a different context. And Canadians don't often acknowledge that we are beneficiaries of flow that comes northward for us as well. We like to pretend we're very different from Americans, but the 20 years I've lived in Australia have taught me actually that we are all Americans, right? But we're different kinds. The challenge we have at our center here is very similar to the one that you have in terms of there are invisible histories, right? You have a border that has been reified, and you spoke very eloquently and articulately about it's caused hysteria and racism, and it becomes a source of xenophobia. We in North Queensland do not have a border. And so our problem is sometimes the opposite, and that people do not recognize that they are in a different country when they come up here. But we are also the source of extractivist politics, and all kinds of things are extracted from our region, including our intellectual labor. We have a problem with the brain drain here. There's a history of sugar labor, of gold mining, and all kinds of submerged racial histories that go along with that. And a lot of distrust between university institutions, which are seen as places of elite culture, and the everyday person. You've done exemplary work building trust with many communities and invisible communities. You know, the work with, you know, Asian migrants to the region, Blacks in that region, your embrace of Palestinian scholars, all of that is just amazing to me. I've used a movie called Machiapolis for a very long time. You probably know it, in a subject that I teach that's about, you know, how we are all in this stage of late capitalism beneficiaries of cross-border labor and the invisible extractivist issues to do with that. And our students up here in North Queensland sometimes don't see their connections to those things too. They think we're very far away from that. We're not global. Victoria, why are you teaching us this thing, using this documentary from Tijuana? I don't want to take up time because we have very little time for questions that I want to open up to everybody, but I have one beginning question, if you might give it to me, which is if you have 3 key things about building trust with those communities that don't trust the university and inviting them into the space, what would your 3 pieces of advice be?
Well, some of them are in this last slide, you know, but I would say one is really meet people where they are, and also show respect and humbleness, because that's the problem of the arrogant academic, right? I mean, in general, right? The perception, right? We're nice people, right? We're not arrogant, we're nice. But again, the perception is that the institution, you know, covers you with this sort of a halo of superiority, right? And you have to leave that out. You have to abandon that, change your shirt, you know, and say, hey, you know, and there are things that you need to be, again, the listening process, you need to really work on that, because it becomes a skill, and it's not only mediated by the cultural elements inherent to a particular community situation or nation, but just in general, to be able to take the time, be patient, and listen. And then when you're asking the questions, you know, because sometimes it's repetitive, right? People will tell you the same thing in 3 different ways. But you have to be able to discern what's kind of the bottom line of that. And then the other thing is to reciprocate that time and be in contact, because people disappear. And then when we need something, we reach out to, you know, so and so. And then probably the 4th element is to work with the authorities, especially if you're working with native nations or First Nations. It's very important to engage with the authorities and their formal processes, because otherwise, you know, you become this Lone Ranger person that is going to do who knows what, and you don't have access. So in order to gain, I would say, legitimate access, fair access, it's very important to engage with the authorities or the representatives of the community, right? So those things we have learned. even here in Tucson, we've been able to engage with our local elected officials in some of these events we do, and that's helpful because those are connections and those are links that you don't normally get, right? So those are things that I would mention.
I love how you put community engagement at the heart. So many universities do it as an add-on, and I love that you start with that. We have time maybe for 2 quick other questions in the 3 minutes that are left. I'll open up the table. Yeah, Adele.
Thank you. That was such a rich presentation. And I visited Phoenix, Arizona in 2022 and was really impressed by the street art collection there. And I remember there was one mural in particular about that was capturing the disappearance of girls and women, which is a common occurrence. And it was such a moving piece of artwork that I think had such an impact that a newspaper article could not. And so I'm interested in how you've perhaps created the living archive to capture the mural work and keep those stories alive.
In what sense? Are you talking about the technical components and
Yeah, I suppose given that, you know, murals are impermanent and that they can be bombed and painted over and they disappear too, but what you're doing in archiving the artistic stories is novel, and I suppose thinking about how we could potentially do that here. Is it about a website or?
It's a combination. So some of the muralists are also very immersed in multimedia, and they're very mindful of the risks that the art faces publicly, right? In fact, I can briefly mention an anecdote. We had a conflict with 2 of the participants in Nogales because one group, and there's always politics and conflict, right? But one group basically pretty much sabotage a mural that was done by another project for reasons that we didn't even know. So this became like a public, they went to the authorities in the city, and then they called us to sort of become the intermediaries of this conflict. And so that's just one example, right? That we couldn't do much except we couldn't side with any of them, but we could try to find funds for them to try to remedy the situation. There are things that people are thinking long-term in terms of funding that would assure maintenance and preservation of some of this public art that is out in the street, it's out to the elements. And sometimes we don't think about that. So some of these artists have been creating a fund for insurance purposes or for other types of care that, especially related to large projects, large murals that have these, that face traffic, for instance, right? So those are some of the things we're thinking about. The artists themselves are really making sure that there's a lot of video productions, and they promote the art by bringing other artists and performers and musicians to use those spaces. So that's another thing that we've been finding is very useful. The more activity, respectful activity, we call it, that we have in those sites, the more they last and the more protected they are from any type of public dangers that you can find. So those are some of the tactics that we've been learning from the artists, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I love your use of the term tactics. I really think that you're employing a lot of very agile tactics, thinking about tactics and strategies, more theories there.
We learn. So I'm not an artist, so I've been learning from all of them because they think about those things, right? They are out there, and for us, it's more of a, okay, how do we help you? Oh, well, how about insurance funding? Because we have these sort of projects, right? So. Yeah.